Get going. So my name, for those of you who haven't met me, is Yeva Indrunite. I'm the Policy and Partnerships Manager at Camco Clean Energy. And today it is my pleasure to welcome you all to the online forum called Putting Women in the Spotlight, How to Target Female Customers Through Distributed Renewable Energy Business Models and Operations. We're very excited to present this forum to you. It has been organized in partnership between Camco and the 2X Collaborative. And we have a really great panel today, as well as a lot of attendees who will hopefully all share their experience through different parts of this event. For those of you who don't know Camco, very briefly, Camco Clean Energy is a climate and impact fund manager with over 30 years of experience in developing and emerging markets. Gender equity has always been at the forefront of our work, as you will hear a bit more in greater detail later. And we have been actively working to align both our operations and to help our investees align their operations to the 2X Gender Lens investing criteria, or the 2X GLI. However, I would say over the last year at least, we realized from our experience and from sort of markets analysis in the broader, particularly in Sub-Saharan Africa, which is our focus today, we realized that perhaps the fourth criteria of GLI, which is the consumption criteria, focusing on products and services that specifically or disproportionately benefit women, has been rather often overlooked in the DRE space. And this is why we decided to bring this event and bring all of you together today to hear from some experts in the field, as well as to share their own experiences and hopefully come out of this with enhanced knowledge and enhanced connections. So some of our key aims of this event is to develop mutual knowledge base to strengthen public-private partnerships and to allow networking opportunities for all of you so that we can further grow the 2X GLI community. I would like to note that this is the first of the two events under the same banner. So today we are focusing on Sub-Saharan Africa, and in about a month's time, or exactly a month's time, on the 9th of March, we will run a similar forum, but focusing more specifically on small island developing states. We hope that for those of you who are also working in those regions, you'll be able to join us as well. The final point for me is that today's event or today's agenda is is split into three parts. We will start with a keynote address, which will be followed by a roundtable discussion moderated by Jessica Espinoza, the CEO of the 2X Collaborative. And after the roundtable discussion, we will all invite you to join what we call themed networking, which will take place on a different online platform, but all of that will be explained in greater detail just after the roundtable. The event is expected to last about 1 hour and 45 minutes. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker today, who is Ms. Prudence Muchinuta. Prudence is the Chief Financial Officer at Community Markets for Conservation, or Camco. She's based in Lusaka, Zambia, where her main role is to provide leadership to position the company, Camco, at the forefront of the industry. She's a senior executive with extensive experience in a range of sectors, starting in telecommunications, financial services, retail, manufacturing, and social enterprises. Prudence is clearly very passionate about climate justice, as we all are. And outside of her day-to-day job, she participates in a number of discussions and solutions, or trying to create solutions around climate change, advocating particularly for gender-sensitive strategies in supply chains, as she believes this is the pathway to sustain change. Through her affiliation with the Rallying Cry, Prudence participated at the recently held COP26, where she presented a speech on Gender Day at the COP26 presidency's event on advancing gender equality in climate action. So without further ado, Prudence, the floor is yours for the keynote address.
Thank you, Eva, for that amazing introduction. I wish I could live up to such a narrative, but I believe together with your support and many other women here, we can. Good day, everybody. It is an honor and privilege to give the keynote speech at the first Sub-Saharan Africa Focus Virtual Forum, putting women in the spotlight within the sustainable energy sector. Here in Southern Africa, you see darkness, areas largely void of light. You can imagine rural families going to sleep in total darkness with no light to read by, no way to charge a mobile phone, no electrical appliances. Simple things. Every person should have access to energy. And with climate change, we need to reduce CO2 emissions and move to energy that is efficient and renewable. The current model of development is not sustainable. Today, I will argue that we need to place inclusion and equity at the forefront of our efforts. Any serious shift towards sustainable development requires gender equality. This is why I especially thank Camco Clean Energy and the 2X Collaborative for their leadership in bringing a strong focus on gender equality and women's empowerment to the agenda of this forum. As an only female executive, I understand the challenges of advocating for gender equality and putting women in the spotlight. But most importantly, I understand the impact, commitment, and change we bring to the table when we are in the forefront. The topics around climate change are often viewed as areas of male dominance, yet the effects are most importantly felt by women. From the perspective of Camco, we do the best we can to improve the livelihoods of the rural communities, and notably recognizing the dots that connect conservation, agriculture, and energy. Women must be undoubtedly part of the economic, social, and political transformations that come with the transition to a clean energy future, to participate as agents of change rather than merely recipients. Efforts to address gender in climate change adaptation often start the conversation with women as particularly vulnerable victims in extreme weather events, but this approach often undervalues women's potential as leaders and change agents. Whilst conversations around global sustainability do bring forth a vision to eradicate poverty, reduce inequality, and make growth inclusive and production and consumption more sustainable, while combating climate change and respecting a range of other planetary boundaries. These conversations do communicate that it is time to empower people to make sustainable choices. But for many of the women, we may all agree the problem is not unsustainable choices, but a lack of choices in the first place. The renewable energy sector has ample employment opportunities with a projected 29 million job opportunities by 2050. While this creates room for women within the workforce, 60% of its hires are men. The World Economic Forum explains the empowering women in the industry and in their communities will strengthen economic and social progress and support governments to deliver gender-balanced, sustainable energy for all. Coming back home, we see that poor women, especially in rural areas, are particularly affected by the continued depletion of natural resources. They are on the front lines. They bear primary responsibility for ensuring and sustaining their households' needs for energy, food, and water. They are overworked and underpaid, if paid at all, and have very few choices. Of a population of 19.5 million in Zambia, only 31% has access to electricity, with 60% of the urban and 4% of the rural population having access to power. Many of the people rely on open fires and the traditional use of biomass for cooking. Reliance on solid fuels such as wood, dung, crop waste, coal, or charcoal is the norm across the African continent. It is estimated that poor rural women can work 12 more hours per week than men, with many of them working as many as 16 to 18 hours a day, doing field work as well as handling other domestic responsibilities, most of which is unpaid. They are responsible for water and firewood collection in almost 2/3 of households in developing countries. Therefore, energy policies need to address two neglected but very important issues: the time poverty experienced by women and the ill health they experience from the wood smoke inhaled during cooking. Ladies and gentlemen, the opportunity cost of these activities frequently excludes women from undertaking income-generating activities, which deprives poor families of much needed income. By investing infrastructure and time and labor-saving technologies such as renewable energies, fuel-saving stoves and mills, more time can be freed up for women, and this expands their freedom and opportunities. Recognizing that rural women would not be able to participate in economic development opportunities unless their workloads were reduced is the reason why we are all having this conversation. And Camco Clean Energy and the 2X Collaborative are inviting you and me to join them and be part of the solution. Such public-private partnerships are working to save lives, empower women, and combat climate change by creating platforms bringing women to the forefront of a global market to clean and efficient household cooking solutions. Women's access to energy contributes substantially to their empowerment and sustainable development. Women are acutely aware of this and of this reality, and in many parts of the world, many women have formed groups to work collaboratively in setting up community-based initiatives. So if you and I were thinking this is not possible, visit the rural areas and see what many other women are doing out there. One such initiative is the Solar Sister. The UN describes the Solar Sister as an award-winning social enterprise advancing women's entrepreneurship to bring off-grid electricity and clean cooking solutions to undeserved communities across sub-Saharan Africa. Solar Sister trains women in entrepreneurship and equips them with the services and goods they will need for their sustainable businesses. The work is happening on the ground, and we need to invest in this. Advocacy and awareness raising will not be enough. Women must be at the forefront of this clean energy future, reaping equal benefits from these investments and playing a leadership role at all levels of the energy value chain. Evidence from the other sectors suggests that integrating women into all levels of the energy value chain will lead to more effective clean energy initiatives, unlock greater return on investments, and expand the prospects of reducing emissions. These rural women return home with the capacity to fabricate, install, and maintain solar lighting systems, and the knowledge to ensure that their villages become technically and financially self-sufficient. While these small-scale interventions are impressive and moving in the right direction, they are not enough to sustain the energy needs of future generations. Needless to say, bringing energy to women will open a world of possibilities that will benefit women and all of us. If energy were universally available, new windows of opportunities would open for women, including access to modern means of communication and information, new livelihood and training options, and even leisure time. Realizing these opportunities will involve a sustained push to connect communities which remain off the electrical grid. According to Bloomberg, new energy finance investments into clean energy projects and companies swelled to a record $174 billion for the first half of 2021. And today's emphasis is a call for sustainable and equitable energy policies and programs that involve local communities and women. Today, energy policies not only distort the true cost of environmental damage and social exclusion, but can also favor the wealthy through the provision of unfair subsidies. We also know that sustainable energy efforts are more successful when women are consulted in the design and implementation of new technologies. Certain modern household appliances requiring modern energy, such as modern clean cooking stoves, are generally developed by male engineers in laboratories rather than with inputs from or in consultations with the end users, whom we know tend to be women. The top-down approach has led to failure to take into account local and cultural contexts, such as local cooking traditions and preferences, and the limited capacity of poor households to afford or carry out maintenance or repair spare parts of energy technologies. How can we then ensure stronger linkages with the end users, in particular women? One way is through stakeholder consultations for key national energy strategies and programs. Greater consultation is urgently needed. the number reported for women's participation as stakeholders around energy initiatives are still not encouraging. In moving forward, women should be involved at all stages of decision-making, processes within the energy and other related sectors. Evidence from India and Nepal suggests that women's involvement in decision-making is associated with better local environmental management. As of September 2021, women occupied less than 21% of all ministerial positions held in various disciplines, including the field of environment, natural resources, and energy. Now, that brings me to my main point today. As long as women continue to face discrimination and barriers to their full participation in society, we will not be able to tackle our most pressing challenges. Whether we are talking about participation in the economic or political arena, or the freedom to make decisions about their own lives and bodies, or sustainable energy for all, women continue to be silenced and marginalized, and this social exclusion of women is hurting not just women, but it is hurting all of us. For the sake of current and future generations, we must nurture and develop half of humankind's collective intelligence and capacity. The full and equal participation and leadership of women is no longer an option. It is an urgent necessity if we are to achieve the transformational change that is needed at all levels and spheres of society and sustainable development. Ladies and gentlemen, if women are given the opportunities and resources, they can become drivers of sustainable development. Solar energy can provide entire villages with lighting, pumped water, refrigeration, and the electrification of health centers, schools, and other public facilities. There are many basic benefits that renewable energy can provide, including a window to the outside world via access to mobile phones, television, the internet, radio, empower women's and men's small businesses. Availability of street lighting can prevent violence against women. We need research that measures the sustained social exclusion of women and quantifies the economic cost of this tremendous lost potential. We need an international monitoring system to assess progress. Gender equality in energy access should be an explicit principle and component of global energy governance. Women often possess special skills and experiences relevant to climate change, especially knowledge of local ecosystems, agriculture, and natural resources management. They hold great potential as entrepreneurs in clean technology and eco-friendly enterprises. Women are also disproportionately vulnerable to the effects of climate change and are often left out of technological development. Climate change interventions are unlikely to be successful without the support and involvement of women. Now, we need equal participation and representation so that gender parity is seen as the norm and not the exception in any boardroom, laboratory, classroom, or even in an intergovernmental negotiation. We need to keep putting women in the spotlight. And as I read through the notes shared by the Camco team in the past week as we approached this event, it was to my delight to see from the level of participation of the women here today that the talent pool of women actively working and leading in the field of clean energy is deep. And most importantly, we have men amongst us in support who understand the significance of bringing women to the forefront. It is time to empower women. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Prudence, for this really inspiring keynote speech. I had the chance to see you deliver a live speech at COP26, and I'm so glad you were able to join us for this virtual event today as well, because the message that you're sharing in this perspective from Zambia and from other local contexts in Sub-Saharan Africa is so powerful. So thank you so much for inspiring us and framing this important discussion today. It's now my pleasure to introduce you all to our panelists today. We have Carolyn Frontini, CEO and co-founder of UpOva, and she will introduce herself and explain you a little bit more about her background in a moment. Then we have Inka Schomer, Gender and Infrastructure Advisor and Director at Distill Inclusion. Laura Latti, Impact Manager at Camco and the Renewable Energy Performance Platform. And we have Tammy Topi George, who leads the productive use element of the National Electrification Program at the Rural Electrification Agency in Nigeria. Warm welcome to all of you. Thanks so much for joining us today. For all of you in the audience, we will have time for a Q&A after this initial roundtable discussion. So please feel free to ask your questions in the chat, and we will aim to address all of them in the Q&A session in a few minutes. So let's start by assessing the current play of field. Inka, you have extensive experience in advising various stakeholders in the sector, as well as contributing to the development of the global knowledge base for closing gender gaps in the energy sector. If you could briefly introduce yourself and share a bit of your background, especially as it relates to the topic of today's discussion. And then it would be great if you could particularly dive into where do you currently see the key challenges with regards to addressing the needs for women customers, and where across the value chain are the main gaps from your experience.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Jessica, for the introduction, and Prudence for that really great framing. Can't be more in agreement with what was said. I'm Inka Schomer. I'm joining you from Cape Town today. I'm an independent consultant working with various organizations, including the World Bank Group, the Rocky Mountain Institute, Deloitte, and KPMG. And I've had the pleasure of working the last 15 years on the intersection of energy, infrastructure, and climate change, predominantly in the region I am based. So on the issue of consumers, what we really see is that women are not seen as a valuable market segment. The overall rhetoric is often that energy systems, especially distributed renewable energy business models and operations, benefit everyone. There are, of course, other segmentations beyond women and men, and I encourage all companies and stakeholders to really look at those issues, but I'll be speaking to that segmentation today. It's important to note that when we speak about distributed renewable energy systems, that there's really a sliding scale. It can be everything from on-grid to really small-scale off-grid technologies. So it's important to talk about services and products when we're in that space. The interventions can also really vary. You can have work with utilities or discos, and then you can also have work with off-grid solar companies. And it's important to know that those interventions are often different, but they are overall gender gaps that apply to both. In terms of the gaps I want to look at, I want to give you some framing around marketing and sales, some of it around customer financing, the after sales and customer care journey. There's a lot on research and development in terms of opportunities, and I'll just touch on those briefly, and then you'll hear from others here on really interesting insights there. Other issues is partnerships, and then of course HR and company culture. And then there's other factors such as governments, policies, investors, and others, but I won't touch on those. So I'll jump into some of the issues around marketing and sales. We don't have enough sex disaggregated information. There's limited budget often to go in and really understand women's aspirations and desires around energy services and technologies. So what we see is really missed opportunities also on looking at productive uses of energy. Where are women in the value chain? What kind of activities are they doing? What are those labor burdens and time poverty aspects that are impacting them in their work? We also know from, for instance, 60 decibel research that information about energy services and products reaches on average, men more often than women. This is linked to mobility patterns and other issues. Moving on to some of the consumer finance aspects. This is well studied overall, but sometimes limited focus in the renewable energy sector or the DRE sector. There is an inherent bias at all levels, including at the customer level in terms of access to finance. Both women and men loan officers in a study in Turkey, for example, by the World Bank, found that bias in terms of who is a viable customer to purchase an asset or a technology. And of course, that links back to that discussion on the kinds of assets one needs to be productive, to thrive, and to earn an income. It's also important to note that in household decision-making, it's not necessarily seen as a positive thing for women to earn money. So I think in the access to finance conversation, there needs to be a real sensitivity around engaging partners in that journey and not assuming that this is a welcome change, and looking at those dynamics that's across the world. These decisions are made at a household level, and there are power dynamics at play there. When we think about the after sales and customer journey, what I've seen with a lot of companies, again, is the assumption that that is the same for women and men. But what we've seen when I've worked with companies, for example, on solar water pumping and other technologies, is that for women, culturally, there's a hesitancy to touch technologies, to work with them, and therefore they're left out of conversations around maintenance, around fixing systems. So companies have a real opportunity there to look at those issues and pay a bit more attention, maybe have separate consultations, or provide that extra customer care so that they feel ownership and they understand the functionings of the system or the ready board or whatever it is, because otherwise that information sits with only male members of the household, and they are often also working and moving and doing other things. In terms of research and development, just a few notes. Often we're not looking at technologies that would make women's lives easier, make them more productive, and make them improve their entrepreneurship activities. So crop drying or fish drying or other activities. So really focusing on those value chains, and also looking at what kind of energy services they need as they grow their businesses. Other things to look at are payment plans, the energy services and time of day that those are provided. So as companies are looking at their business models and their research and development aspects, there's always opportunity to delve further. And then on partnerships, I hear this a lot from mini-grid companies, for example, is like we're setting up the mini-grid system and we don't really, do the access to finance, or we're not, an agricultural institution. But I would say for various entities, there's really an opportunity to say, how can we partner with NGOs or with, village savings and loan associations to enable individuals who have gained access to energy services to be productive and to adopt technologies as they move forward, and especially considering those access to finance issues and those other barriers that we spoke about in terms of, women's agency. And then on the last point, I think it's never to be underestimated that if a company in this space doesn't actually progressively think about its company culture, its staffing, then you can see in the business model that there's often not a lot of attention paid to this. So thinking about your sales team, thinking about your female sales officers or customer care, or people working in the tech or maintenance aspects, are they safe to travel? Do they feel welcome? What is their experience in terms of that consumer interface, and can they thrive? There are many other issues to unpack, but I will stop there. And we can discuss them further.
Thank you so much, Inka. You covered a lot of really interesting ground there, and we'll definitely dive into all of the aspects that you just mentioned along this conversation. So turning perhaps next to the implementation challenges, Carolyn Up-Over has recently designed its Gender Action Plan. So if you could also briefly introduce yourself and your work, and then walk us through this experience. What were your key findings from the baseline assessment, and which actions have you identified to improve how the company targets women customers? Over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for the opportunity to share our experience. So I'm Caroline, I'm the co-founder of UPOA, and we are solar home system distributor operating in Cameroon. We have installed around like 40,000 systems around the country, and we have like hundreds of agents presenting products and really interacting with the customer in the villages. So first, why did we implement a gender action plan? We had like really in the deep part of the company, in the value of the company, the idea that we wanted to have gender as one of the core value of the company, gender equality, to make the company stronger and more relevant on a mid to long term basis. As Inka mentioned, I do believe that it's very important to have like diversity. Again, like there are a lot of diversity to talk about, but here we're going to focus on the gender one. It's also important to understand that we really started doing a gender action plan only last year, so after 4 to 5 years of operation, when we felt that we had like the resources, kind of the time to take a more like global and systemic approach to the gender issues and theme in the company. And I think that's a point to keep in mind, especially looking at distributor company at various stage of development on what is realistic to implement on gender issues and gender challenges. One of the key findings of our gender action plan is that we really lack data. So that was kind of the first thing that we did. So now we track KPIs on gender, so across all operation. And I think that was an interesting point to see that we are a bit blindsided. We didn't think that this was an important thing to note. So now we have like our database nice and all with gender so that we can do the analysis. We did a lot with the gender action plan. We updated HR policy. We implemented a talent program for women. We worked on salary gaps. But I'll pass on that quickly to focus on targeting women customers, which is kind of the key discussion here. And maybe as a start, so that we can have like a common conversation, when we talk about women customer, we actually don't know exactly like who are like women customers. So the proxy that we used is who is signing the contract and who is kind of the main point of contact for our agent and the households. We do target mostly households. I would say 80% of our customer base are households. So we use as a proxy the gender of the person who signed the contract as are they women or are they men customer. But as I'm probably talking about it, you might all realize that this is a very narrow point of view. It's not only like who is exactly the customer. I mean, there is indeed I think an interesting vision to understand who is the main point of contact and what are the implications. If so, it's disproportionately men. We are around 85 to 90% of our signatories of contracts are men. So it's interesting to understand like how this bias towards having more men signatories impact the whole operation of the company, the whole like impact of what our products have on the villages or the community that we served. But it's not the whole story. We know that women in households will beneficiate from having, access to better lighting. Like there is not smoke. We know that the value of a solar home system to improve the quality of lighting for children to study it's quite a big thing for a customer. Like it's really something that they value in getting a solar home system, and we know that culturally these are mostly women who will take care of children education. So that being said, I think I'll go a step further by thinking about, okay, so we have like household customers and we also have business customer, usually running a small shops or thing like this. And here I think it's very interesting to see like actually who is the signatory. Is it a man or women? Because the dynamic is a bit different, because it might be a business run by women or a business run by men. And on businesses run by women, we've tried to, through the gender action plan, we try to get a better understanding on, what are the businesses who are traditionally run by women, what would they need, and it's it's super complicated. It varies by region, it varies by villages, by the size of the villages. Are they close to the city or not? What type of crops would they farm? But what we see is that there is a lot of, if I summarize it, there is a lot of labor that is done by women that could be very much more efficient with the right, so productive use equipment, such as, for example, solar mills. It's quite one that we've talked about in the sector. But then we run into a different issue, which is, okay, like we can target that this type of product will be very helpful to women, but then there is the issue of the business model, because I mean, the work of women is, I mean, quote unquote, free for a community. So, you know, putting a price on a product and on the services, then we find that the conversation always ends up in there is no money for, you know, acquiring such a product. But that being said, I think there is a lot companies can do on getting more into getting a better understanding of the gender dynamic in the sector. I think, I mean, as Inka, you mentioned, training, I mean, having specific training and make sure that women participate to this training on products, on how it works, can really be very helpful in the long term. And that being said, also being mindful that we are a company, we are here to serve our clients. So it's not, I feel it's not our role to say like, we're going to come and we're going to solve the gender issues, you know, in your community, and, you know, women have to go to train on products. I don't think that's really our position. And I think that's where the discussion can start on how to, you know, integrate the different actors in the sector. It might be NGO, local organization. It might also be international organizations that have, like, you know, better knowledge on how to overcome these challenges. And I think, yeah, that's a great discussion to have, and that's why we have like such a good panel with everybody from a different position. So yeah, I'll stop here and happy to take any question.
Thank you, Caroline. Very interesting angles, and it's interesting to hear your particular perspective on this. We'll get back to the topic of partnership that you just mentioned in a moment, but let me ask you a brief follow-up question. As a distributor, are you able to access, you know, to get access to products to appropriately address your customers' needs, or what are perhaps some of the challenges that you face in that regard?
Yeah, that's a good point to actually really highlight that we are a distributor, so we actually can only distribute products that are available to us. So we work with different suppliers to find like the product that will fit our customer need the most. But it's not always that simple to really like say, okay, like this is exactly the product that we want. And for example, on women, we would love to have like cheaper solar mills, you know, that will really be very helpful in getting these solar mills more easily into the market. That will not solve everything, but that will definitely be a step forward. But then it's a whole process when we don't have all of the keys, and we definitely need to work with suppliers. Those suppliers are usually very keen on having our feedback on what the market needs, and then it's really about, I mean, it's another partnership, you know, like how do you build a strong relationship between suppliers and distributors so that you can find the right product, and keeping in mind also that it takes a lot of time to develop a product. And we also have, and I'm talking about product that, for example, I mean, there is definitely two things, that product that don't even exist because we haven't thought about it. And also, I think it was Inka mentioned that, or Prudence mentioned that R&D team are usually men, and especially men that live usually in another country than the one that product is designed for, you know. So there are really like a lot of probably channel to open to make sure that we have the right product on the market. And then I was also thinking about like, how do we make sure that we have the right price? And then it's also depend on, you know, like external factors. So for example, we've seen like prices increase in the past years due to shortage in battery and solar panels. So it's definitely more, I think, on the mid to long term conversation. And actually, I wanted to add a point that I forgot to mention, because we just had the data this morning, because after we had a first discussion on how to prepare for this panel, we actually look in our data to to see, you know, like, do women agents sell more product to women? So when I say product to women, so women are signatory of the contract. And we run this data over the last year on our the women that are operating in our shops. And we actually found out that, so it's quite shallow, but we need to do more deep dive to really understand the dynamics. But the first results was that actually women sell more to men than men, so that we were like, oh wow, we didn't expect that. So that's just to add on, like, it's a really complex conversation, and it's a complex challenge. And I think, yeah, we need to have more data and get our hands more and heads more into that that field to really grasp the entirety of the challenge at hand.
Thank you, Caroline. Inka, are there any quick reactions, kind of immediate reactions from your side before we continue?
Yeah, thank you for that. In agreement with all the points raised, I suppose some of the challenges we've seen is access to foreign currency. So actual companies that can import these products tend to be larger players. So again, that links to kind of gender equality issues. The import timelines are really varied, and that has operational implications for companies. And again, smaller players that can be, can kind of shut down your operations if those don't go along those timelines. Certification standards have a real impact also on the kind of technologies that make its way into markets. And that links back to the point raised by Caroline in terms of, what you can get hold of and that research and development stream. So it'd be fantastic to kind of do a study on what are the technologies that are needed and how could they be developed at the least cost, and then also with aspects around maintenance considered. I think another thing is the local content discussion and the trade-off there. A lot of products that are produced locally don't get those global certification, but they are also then really interesting opportunities around women's employment, entrepreneurship when you have that local content element. So around products, that are just some of the dynamics I wanted to add there.
Excellent, thank you. So let us turn to the role of funders. Laura, over to you. If you could also share a bit of background about your role with Camco and as a funder. And then from a funder's perspective, do you think that there is currently sufficient attention given to ensuring alignment with the 4th-X GLI criteria, so gender smart design of products and services? And based on Camco's experience, what is needed to improve the situation overall?
Okay, thanks very much, Jessica. Yeah, and thank you for everyone joining this panel today. So just to my role, I'm an impact manager at Camco Clean Energy. And in my role, I work with several environmental, social and governance issues with our investee companies. Among them is working with our investee companies on their gender action plans, how to mainstream gender equality into their operations. And to your first question, if there has been enough attention, I would start by saying no. And perhaps as a background, so I think over the past few years, the gender equality conversation has changed to profitability of diverse teams and gender diverse teams. So the importance of women in workforce, especially the importance of women in leadership and senior management positions, and of course, women entrepreneurs, and how that can kind of increase the profitability of companies and the investments we make. And I think in that sphere, especially the development financing institutions have focused on improving women representation in companies, whether it's now workforce or the senior management positions. And in this area, a lot of DFIs fund work around the gender action plans. and how to progress gender equality within the companies. We do this too. We provide result-based finance for our investees if they put certain policies in place about equal pay for equal work, parental leave, and so on, and increasing the amount of women in the companies. I believe, sorry, something with my voice. So I believe about 18% of the funds to date that has been aligned with 2X go towards the criteria 4. So products and services that target women, which is a rather small proportion. And this is in overall, if all the funding that is aligned with 2X. So if we think about climate funding or funding to renewable energy, that is obviously a fraction of that proportion. However, I think this theme is obviously very important, as we heard from the keynote speech. It is something that can increase women's resilience to climate change. It is something can help us to kind of tackle the access to energy issue through access to clean, affordable energy. There's a lot of other sustainable development aspects that can be improved through that. So no, there hasn't been enough focus. How to improve the situation? I think we heard that already from Inka and Caroline, kind of where the gaps are. So from funders' perspective, I think funding is obviously required to tackle those gaps, whether it's data gaps, availability of information. So I would say mainly grant funding towards proof of concept or feasibility to assist companies to identify what those barriers are. So what are the barriers to access to finance at community level or customer level? What are those productive energy equipment that women require? Where should or studies around where the light bulbs or the electric sockets should be fitted. So I think this would be especially for funding that comes from development finance institutions would be grant funding with the access to companies to build on their business case. I leave it there. Thanks.
Thank you, Laura. It's very interesting the experience that you share, and also just briefly commenting from the experience of the first 3 years of the 2X challenge, and what we've seen in our own learning journey is the other criteria have definitely in the early years received more uptake, because I think it has also been kind of an easier entry point for different sectors and different types of investors and companies. But we have seen also some interesting early case studies about product innovation and really intentional product design where women as customers were involved from the early days. It started mostly in the financial institution space, so designing gender smart financial and non-financial products and services as financial institutions based on these insights. But we've also seen some interesting examples in the distributed renewable energy space, and some of them are highlighted on the 2X Challenge website. So I think, but yeah, I totally agree with you. We definitely want to see much more. And I think there's also an interesting conversation to be had about the role of funders and how they can, often they come in when products are already developed. So how can they also provide incentives and support to support the gender responsive design from the beginning? I see my 2X colleague, Carmen from EIB, has also posted the Gender Smart Climate Finance Toolkit that was launched at COP26. So there's also more inspiration about how to go about this, especially from the investor side. So with that, let us turn to public-private partnership. That is the topic that has come up in some of the discussions so far. And governments, as well as the wider public sector, have made efforts to mainstream gender in the energy sector, as reflected, for example, in the policies, which go as far as focusing on the productive use of energy and drawing on efforts and plans to make the sector more gender inclusive. I would now like to invite Temi Topi. I hope you are, we can't see you on video yet, but I hope you're able to hear us and to participate. It would be great. You are leading the productive use component of the National Electrification Program in Nigeria. So it would be great if you could briefly introduce yourself and then tell us about your approach to integrating gender considerations in program design. just going to pause for a moment to see if Temitope, if you are able to join this conversation, which would be fantastic to have your perspective. If not, perhaps while the tech team is supporting you to get on video, at least audio, we'll continue the conversation, but we'll definitely get back to you and hope you can share your perspective. Quick note also to the audience, please remember that we will open it up to Q&A. So please feel free to share any questions to the panelists in the chat, and we'll get to them in a moment. So skipping then for a moment the topic of public-private partnerships and turning to changing social norms. The introduction of sustainable energy will no doubt make a significant impact in improving the living standards of women, particularly in Africa, as we've heard from the panelists. And it is also closely linked to changing societal norms and culture, for example, when it comes to decision-making about appliances purchases, or how the use of these appliances can change family life dynamics. And we've also already heard a bit from you on, how kind of financial inclusion could affect these dynamics. So how does this affect sector growth? How can companies better navigate these dynamics? And is there a role for other stakeholders and partnerships here? Some of you have already pointed out the role of civil society, NGOs, and community-based organizations. So it would be great to dive a little bit deeper into that aspect of social norms. And whoever feels inspired to, among the panelists, to chime in, please feel free to unmute and get started.
Okay, maybe I'm happy to start, and Inga and Caroline, please fill in. We have one of the discussion kind of themes later on after the panel is also around the social norms. So maybe to start with, I think it's obviously social norms are something what we work with, but as we have heard today, changing them is exceptionally important. And especially in matters where they stay in front of equality. So I think it's very important, and I think it starts from all the different kind of levels. So whether we are talking about funders, we are talking about government institutions, or the community level. So we do know that in all these levels there is specific bias that exist. And I think what every organization in different kind of levels can do is try make their employees, the people they work with, more knowledgeable about the existing bias that is there. So more awareness around this issue. And of course, then prohibiting any kind of discriminatory behavior that exists, again, in all these levels, whether it's finance, government, or the energy service companies working in the community level. So maybe that's something to start with.
Yeah, I can build on that if there's time and if it's useful. I mean, I think we've already said this, companies really do need to understand the specific social norms in a community and possibly form those partnerships to navigate that space. I think what I see a lot in the energy sector is that they're not aware of what other organizations are doing. For example, ICRW or the Helen Keller International and CARE and other organizations that are really focused on gender and household issues. They're doing messaging on how to make joint decision making, how to allocate financial resources, how to support, women as they go on those journeys. And at the consumer level, it'd be really interesting to look at, linking energy companies in those places to those initiatives and trends. It's certainly a slow journey, but I think there's a lot of content and material that I think can be leveraged for that work.
And to add also on that, Laura, when you were talking about raising awareness, so I really feel that as a company, we really have two ways to act. I mean, first, as we do implement gender equality topics in the company, I think we also have like a huge impact, because when the company is quite big, and it's also part of the change that we can bring on also in very organic way. and then the impact on the community. But so talking about raising awareness in our company, we did run what we call like gender awareness campaign, just to talk, actually, just to see, you know, what people in the company felt about gender, what did they understand about gender, and what was really like the baseline before, you know, implementing anything. Or actually, more than implementing anything, we really wanted to be mindful that so me, some of the management team, and actually the person running the gender action plan is not from the same culture as most of the company members. And so we don't want to come, you know, like this is how things should be. This is like the right social norm, because I think, you know, even in France, this is not like we have a lot of work to do. So it was more, you know, like how do we decide as, you know, an organization, what do we want to fight for, and where do we see, you know, that it's a topic that inspired the whole team, and it's not just, okay, like from top management, that is from, you know, like European culture, this is how we think, you know, like social norms should be. And it was actually quite interesting to understand, you know, where we would, you know, match and where not, and also so that we could take that as a basis to implement gender equality action in the company. And I feel that, I mean, so from the year that we have experienced, I do feel that just putting the word gender out there, just like having, you know, it as a conversation inside the company, just open, you know, this little thing that sometimes you don't look at it, and then you look at it, and then it started just a little bit like spontaneously the conversation. Okay, so now, for example, manager of a sales agent have to ask about gender to their sales agent, you know. So I think there will also be a lot of impact coming from, you know, like just having this topic as an important topic in the company. And also some other point that I wanted to add on the support of founder, I forgot to mention that we actually got support from Camco to implement the gender action plan, and that was definitely key in putting this this project on the top of the list, as we are like a for-profit company. We are distributors in like a very challenging environment. We already serve like communities that are not like definitely not the richest in the country. There is already a struggle in, you know, just like making revenue as a distributor. So it's always like we are very keen on having resources being efficient. And I feel like on gender, since we see it more like as a long-term impact, sometimes it's difficult to put it at the top of the agenda. So definitely support from founder can really be catalytic in having this project implemented. And now that it's there, it will not go away. So that's something I wanted to mention as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much to all of you. So I see we have Temitope on the line, but she says she's unable to unmute. So I hope the tech team can help her. And please send me a quick note in the chat, or let me know when the problem has been fixed, so we can bring her into the conversation. So let me turn to some of the questions from the audience. We have quite a number of questions coming in. So if you could keep your answers brief, that would be ideal, so we can cover all of them. Adrian is asking, how can financial institutions make it easier to catalyze investments into women-owned businesses? And he's mentioning the example of Lend-A-Hand that is aiming to enhance its crowdfunding platform to better attract and increase funding for women-led small businesses in emerging markets. So yeah, what is your view on the role of financial institutions and how they can really catalyze investments in women-led businesses? Oh, fantastic. And if you can keep it quite brief, we can then turn it over to Temitope for the partnership discussion.
Okay, let me try answer that. So I think if I talk from a renewable energy performance platform perspective, where which is one of the funds Camco manages. So we are fortunate enough to be in the role where we can often take on kind of early investment positions in companies. So I think that is definitely a way of catalyzing more finance and kind of mobilizing the private sector finance. So fund managers or funds that have the development finance and institution backing can kind of take that early position and through that mobilize more funding. And then I think what I would add is to kind of share these stories. So the success stories that we have from the companies, to share them with the industry.
Thank you. So let's continue with the public-private partnership discussions, which was another big topic that we wanted to dive in today. And Temitope, we're so thrilled to see you and now on video and to have your voice in this conversation. As I mentioned in the introduction, you are leading the productive use component of the National Electrification Program in Nigeria. It would be great if you could briefly tell us a bit more about your work. And then we're especially keen to hear your approach to integrating gender considerations in program design. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to finally be here. Interestingly, I could see you all and hear you all, but you couldn't see me. But yes, I'm happy to be part of this conversation. As you said, I'm Temitope George, and I lead the productive use of energy and appliances component of the Nigerian Electrification Project. The Nigerian Electrification Project is co-financed by the World Bank and the African Development Bank to the tune of $550 million US. Now, on the topic of gender mainstreaming, so the AFDB as a financer, as a funder, has gender targets in a program. So, for example, with the component I lead, it speaks specifically to providing productive use appliances to 20% of women in the community. So it has to meet. So all the beneficiaries of the grants for productive use appliances have to be women. And so what that informed was our subsidy design framework. So in our subsidy design framework, for example, what we did, we have different incentive levers. And the first one is gender mainstreaming. So for example, the base subsidy or the base grants that someone would receive would be 30% of the cost of the productive use equipment or appliance. So 30%, that's the base subsidy or base grants that they would receive. However, if they can show in their equipment and customer roster that they have a lot of women customers in the community, that bumps up the grant amount to an additional 8%. If they can show, because scalability is also one of the project objectives, if they can show that they want to deploy productive use appliances at scale, that bumps them to an additional 8%. If they can also show, because in some states in Nigeria are poorer than others, so if they can state that if they can show that state where they're providing the productive use appliances in the National Bureau of Statistics criteria falls within that poverty index, then they get an additional subsidy. So the subsidy design framework for productive use of equipment and appliances is particularly tailored towards meeting this gender target provided by the funder, which is 20% of the customers being women. Now, what are some of the challenges we're facing with this? The challenge we face, so I have been to some of these communities with members of my team, and when we go to those communities and we say we want to meet the stakeholders, right? So when you go to the community, you meet the community leader, the stakeholders, particularly in a lot of the northern communities, you will find that you will not meet a single woman. I would be the other woman in the room. I would be the only woman in the room, in fact. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to address some of these cultural nuances relating to gender. Because the women are there, they know they're there. They say that, oh, the women have gone to the market, or they've gone to get water, right? They've gone to fetch water, because they're the ones that typically do that in those communities. So the conversation is something that has to be an ongoing conversation. But what we also have to meet the gender targets, we actually have a gender mainstreaming specialist that's actually that works with all of us, all the component heads, to make sure they're meeting those gender targets that are provided by the program. The Rural Electrification Agency as well, again, guided by the gender targets by the funder, AFDB, has come up with a gender mainstreaming policy. But that policy should be published in a few months. Because I'm told that it's still being reviewed by the HR department, and once that has been reviewed, it will be publicized and it will be published. But a lot of it will still be around this 20% that I'm talking about, ensuring that the customers, the women customers, the beneficiaries are women. In other programs of the REA, for example, the Energizing Education Program, what they try to do is they focus on girls. So by the end, the Energizing Education Program is to provide power systems in federal universities across the country. But a key component for the EPC contractor is to make sure that they train STEM students. And those STEM students have to be women. They have to be girls, female. And so they will be trained by the EPC contractor, and also during the O&M that the EPC contractor is employed for an additional year once they've handed those power systems to those universities. So it's just under 500 STEM students that will be beneficiaries by the end of the program. But those are the ways that that the REA is being deliberate about meeting this, the gender gaps, and meeting this gender mainstreaming targets as provided by the program, both the AFDB and the World Bank targets. So this is how the government is doing that. I'll stop there for questions or.
Thank you so much, Temitope. It's really interesting to hear this holistic approach, and I love, what you mentioned about the female STEM students. So very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing this. We have only 5 minutes left for this roundtable before we go to our next agenda point of more interaction with our audience. So in these last 5 minutes, I would like to invite all of the panelists to quickly comment on what are the most important actions required to improve the availability of products and services to female customers in the distributed renewable energy space. So your key takeaways from the discussion today, and anything else you would like to add, so to flag, so the most important actions that are required and that you would like to see everybody take forward from here. And let's start with you, Inka.
So I'll go back to data. I've led a lot of data work, the multi-tier tracking framework, for example, led by the World Bank, and the work by 60 decibels. I'm always looking, I've led that work, but I'm always looking also for data. So I think there's a lot to be done in terms of national data and opportunities, but also I've seen companies sit on data that they're not using. So for example, they've got Excel spreadsheets of their consumer or financing data, default rates, loan size, repayment periods, etc., and they're not analyzing it by women and men. So understanding their customers. The same with marketing content, for example, where are your posts going, who's accessing them, what are the reshares, and what's your company engagement with consumers. So that's my call, and it's always a good starting point. But actions are needed on that and everything else as well. So I'll stop there.
Thank you. Caroline, how about your key takeaways and actions?
So it's very interesting. I love this conversation because I realize that we do have so much things that we can do. I love especially listening to you, Inka. I think you have great knowledge, and I don't know, you should get to every company in the sector and probably share some few points, because, for example, marketing, we never thought about that, how marketing impacting the fact that we do have so many more man-to-man interaction in our company. So yeah, I feel like there is a lot to do, but I do see how we can get a bit deeper and even more very concrete steps to add to our gender action plan that is continuously improving. So that's my key takeaway. Thank you all.
Thank you. Temitope, back over to you. What would be your key takeaways and your call to action? What has to happen?
I would say that it's important that the conversation continues, and it's taken to the community level. What I didn't mention was that one of the consultancies to support the productive use component is a training on productive use consultancy, and that trainer would actually be working with civil society organizations and community-based organizations to actually train them on the importance of, train women on how to operate and maintain some of the productive systems, and also train people around women cooperatives on the importance of getting together and finding ways to purchase these equipment themselves without having without waiting for the program to, like, as you said earlier, a lot of these programs, a lot of the customers will be men. So training them on how to actually access finance, save money, develop their business plans so that they can actually access some of these funds themselves.
Wonderful, thank you. Laura, over to you.
Thanks. I'm just going to say dedicate funding to women. So I think all funders should have a funding line directed to women-owned and led businesses, as well as solutions that help women at the community level or customer level. And I think I would like to encourage all funders to align themselves with the 2X criteria for gender lens investment and taking an official target of dedicating some of the funding towards that.
Thank you so much to all of you for this really interesting roundtable. And we look forward to taking this conversation further and also answer the remaining questions from the audience, as well as have